All right, y'all. To everyone who is joining us, thank you so much. We will probably have more participants trickling in as we go, but I will get started with these introductions. I'm Holland Perryman. I'm a student intern with the Pat Conroy Center, so hello to everyone. So welcome back to our nonprofit Pat Conroy Literary Center's 5th annual and first virtual March 4th, now a 3-day event. March 4th commemorates the anniversary of Pat Conroy's death with a series of educational and inspirational conversations about some of the major themes of Mr. Conroy's life: storytelling, conservation, social justice, and inclusivity. Our March 4th programs are presented in partnership with Penn Center, Nevermore Books, the Beaufort County School District, and First Presbyterian Church of Beaufort. This year's March 4th is sponsored by South Carolina Humanities, a non-for-profit organization inspiring, engaging, and enriching South Carolinians with programs on literature, history, culture, and heritage. We're grateful to all of our partners, sponsors, presenters, attendees, and volunteers for making possible this signature annual program of our nonprofit Conroy Center. We're honored to welcome Penn Center staff members, Dr. Marie Gibbs and Dr. Charlene M. Spearen, for this afternoon's closing presentation, The Convergence of Land and Self. Their talk will explore the connections between 3 common threads: Penn Center's history, the Gullah community, and Pat Conroy's attention to landscape as evocative of one's journey and sense of self. Marie Gibbs earned her doctorate degree in education from Walden University. She is a retired educator who has spent over 30 years teaching the children of St. Helena Island. She has also presented at the Beaufort County School District Summer Institute on teaching ideas and strategies for Gullah students. Dr. Gibbs is actively involved in community social justice projects, and she serves as vice president of the Community Concerned Citizens Group. She is also the docent in the Yorkville W Museum at the historic Penn Center on St. Helena Island. Charlene Spearen earned her MFA in creative writing and her doctorate in composition and rhetoric from the University of South Carolina. She is now serving as the administrator for Penn Center after a successful career at Allen University. She has also served as the program coordinator for USC's Art Institute and was assistant director for the South Carolina Poetry Initiative. She is the author of the poetry collection, A Book of Exquisite Disasters, and her poems have also appeared in many journals and publications. Please welcome from Penn Center, Dr. Marie Gibbs and Dr. Charlene Spearen.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us to be a part of the March 4th discussion. My presentation will be a chronological historical journey of the Gullah culture and Penn Center. My title is Penn Center and the Gullah community that ties, that bind. What a fitting title, because living in this community, Penn Center is a hub in our heart. So what a fitting title for this. Moving on, I'm going to start with the Civil War. This all started because when the cannon sound was heard, enslaved people of St. Helena Island sensed that somehow freedom was coming. April 12, 1862 started the beginning of a new way of life for slaves living on St. Helena Island, has never known since arriving on the ships from Africa. When Union forces occupied the island in 1862, Southern planters fled the island, leaving about 10,000 slaves. These slaves immediately became free. You are free? Well, what did you do? Slaves were left without food, clothing, or shelter, fending for themselves. Help arrived. The re-education of liberated slaves. I say re-education because when the slaves were captured, they had skills and knowledge of growing rice. That is why they were brought to the Sea Islands. But Laura Town stepped in. She was a Quaker and an abolitionist from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She received permission from the government to intercede in the perils of the slave left on St. Helena Island. A Port Royal Relief Fund Society was set up to raise money to bring teachers from Philadelphia to re-educate the newly freed slave. She was later joined by Ellen Murray and Charlotte Fulton, who was the first Black teacher. The women started one of the first schools in America for liberated slaves in 1862 on St. Helena Island, South Carolina. The project was called the Port Royal Experiment. All right, the Port Royal Experiment, they wanted to find out if the liberated slaves could indeed learn how to read and write. Teachers helped the abandoned slave by teaching them how to read, write, and survive economically. Penn School played a tremendous role in the development and in educating the Gullah people of St. Helena Island. When the school started, they didn't have a place to have a school to learn in. So they used the Oak Plantation Schoolhouse. This was the very first schoolhouse for the liberated slave on St. Helena Island. Then something happened. They received a gift. The gift came as a school, the very first school that was all theirs. It was sent down from William Penn from Pennsylvania. It was a prefab building that would be used in the school in 1863 to serve the Gullah community. In this school, the school had about 600 people, students going there until the Depression started. And after the Depression, hardship came to the community and the enrollment dropped. The Gullah language. We often ask, what's the difference between Gullah and Geechee? They're both the same. The Gullah Geechee is also called the Sea Island Creole. It is spoken by the African descendant. Both Gullah and Geechee are used together with a different dialect. The language is spoken and written the way it sounds. The language was created on the transatlantic journey from Africa, where a diverse group were shackled together in the belly of the ship. There wasn't a common language, so they came up with this. It was first called Angola. Gullah came out of Angola. Gullah came out of Angola. Gullah Geechee is still spoken by the African-American population living on the Sea Island, coastal region of the United States, of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Northeast Florida. The Gullah Geechee corridor is the area where captured Africans were brought into the southeastern United States. And this corridor extends from Wilmington, North Carolina to Jacksonville, Florida. So if you live in that area, you are of the Gullah descent. And one thing that what we have done we have the New Testament is now in Gullah. So we have a New Testament, it's in Gullah, and we also have all history that's archived right here at Penn Center. And one thing I was so surprised, I found one with my grandfather speaking. I was touched, my heart was touched. I heard my grandfather talking again, singing common meter and gospel songs. That took me back to our days going to church. Then later on, Penn Center took on, first Penn Center started out with the curriculum from Philadelphia, but that wasn't working much for the students living on this island. They were teaching Latin to the kids, but then they took on the Booker T. Washington model of industrial art education from Tuskegee University. So Booker T. Washington model of industrial education was adopted. This curriculum focused on teaching trades like cobbling, carpentry, blacksmith, and mechanics. These skills could help the newly freed slave earn a sustainable living. Midwives and teacher training was also part of the curriculum. Booker T. Washington believed that skill in hand, so strong in mind. So they incorporate both skills. In the mornings at Penn School, they did academics. In the evening, they did industrial arts. And when I entered school, we did the same thing. We had industrial arts and academics from St. Helena. The school continued to teach students until the middle of the 20th century. The school shifted its focus and began to offer community services such as daycare and health training. Before 1948, the public school system was only required to educate Blacks through 7th grade. And growing up, I heard people talking, I only went to 7th grade. I was wondering why. Now I know this is why. That's always they had to get, that's all they offered them. But Penn Center was unique. Penn School offered education to grade 12 with an earned diploma. That's what made Penn Center so unique and important to the Gullah culture, because they were able to get a high school diploma when they graduated from grades 1 through 12. I should do next. I'm not doing that. My things are messing up. Okay, next. All right. Then came midwife training. Midwife training was held at St. Helena at Penn School. Teachers from Penn School continue to educate the Gullah community at St. Helena Elementary School. Look at this picture. My first grade teachers in this picture. Miss King. Look in the first row, lady sitting in the middle. That was my first grade teacher. She was very mean. My first grade teacher, Miss King. Moving along, land ownership. This was a big thing. Many Americans heard that 40 acres and a mule were given to the former slave. That never happened. When Abraham Lincoln was president, he promised to liberate slaves 40 acres and a mule. But when Andrew Johnson became president, that didn't happen. When the Southern planters flee the land in South Carolina Sea Island during the Civil War, the United States seized lands of planters who did not pay their taxes to the Union. Free slaves living on the island were able to buy this land that was sold in acreage of 10 at $1.25 an acre. So that is how many of the slaves living, the liberated slaves living on St. Helena's Island required land. The people living here, like my family, that's how we got our land. We bought our land. Anybody would say anywhere else, but here, our land was bought and paid for. And that made us a very proud group of people living here. Because cotton was needed to support the Civil War, liberated slaves are paid $1 for picking 400 pounds of cotton. With that money, they used it well. They bought land. And I'm so glad they bought their land, the land I'm living on today. Today, many of the families living on St. Helena's Island own their own land that have been passed down from generation to generation. The one we're living on, my family, has been passed down to at least 4 generations. Land today is used for family compounds, farming, grazing, and timber harvest. As our ancestors before us, most of us still farm our land. Land preservation. Now, this is a battle we face. Most recently, Penn Center have turned to attention to preserving the unique culture and assisting landowners with tax payment, with donations earmarked for this purpose. In the 80s, Penn Center established a land use program and environment education program to develop for the development for the Gullah culture community. This program did the same thing that Penn Center is doing now. We keep the same thing, recycling, doing the same thing. So Penn today is doing what was done in 1980. Penn now has a committee that works with the community on its property. Matter of fact, there's a documentary coming out on BET, maybe next week. It's called Boiling Point. And I guess you'll see some interviews that were done here. Other organizations in the community hold workshops to teach people how to protect heirs' property and how to defend themselves against a developer. Penn Center has been a champion in helping the Gullah community with land retention. When Penn closed its doors in 1948, then Beaufort County took on the education of the public school. Penn Center became an organization for social justice. That's when Dr. King came down here and the Peace Corps, they're training here. Dr. King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference often held meetings here at Penn Center. The center served as a rare retreat where members of both races can meet peacefully without being threatened or harmed. This was a safe haven for anyone coming here. Dr. King President empowered the Gullah community to protest unfair employment. I remember growing up, when we went to Beaufort, there were no Blacks working in the stores. We were spending our monies there. So after school, the kids will get on the bus and go downtown and picket in front of the store. If anybody remember Edward's store, we'll have picket lines going there. So that was encouraged to fight for what you wanted for change. Today, Penn Center is used globally for many events and special occasions. Prominence to the Gullah community. Penn Center today, we're still preserving the past, sustaining the future for Sea Island and the Gullah community. We're still doing that through 159 years later. To do that, we have the Yorkville W Museum and the Welcome Center. In our museum, we chronicle important history, art, artifacts. It's a place of education and a community building. Our Welcome Center showcases and sells art and crafts from our local and all who practice the art and crafts of the ancestors. Our hope is to get more of the Gullah history in the teaching curriculum. Because when I was going to school, and I hear from the guests coming in, we're still not teaching the kids about the Gullah history. So that's our hope, that to see more of the history in text. Religion in the Gullah community and Penn Center goes hand in hand. Penn Center is essential in preserving our culture by hosting our community Sing monthly. Penn's club sponsored the Nativity Scene play every December. Churches played a vital part in the preservation of the Gullah culture by contributing and participating in events and activity. We ask them, they're there. The good part now, guys, the Gullah food. Gullah food and tradition. Our food is shaped by the environment and availability. Rice and seafood are eaten often. Gullah food is mostly cooked in pots. Hopping John, collard greens are for New Year's Day celebration. Family reunions every 5 or 10 years. Storytelling, song, craft, and cooking. These foods you see, these are the foods that have been carried over from generation to generation, and we still do that. We do our okra and tomato. We still do all this stuff. Cookbooks are written and sold in the Welcome Center. You can cook and prepare. You can get a book and prepare one of these delicious meals for your family. All right, seafood, guys. Gullah community seafood. In the Gullah community, we lived on seafood. You could have seafood every night and have something different. Boat builders, they built the boat here at Penn Center. This was where the teaching of boat building began. Cast net making was done here, and we used those net and boat to feed our families. So this is how we lived. Penn Center Heritage Day celebration. This is another way showcase. This is a 3-day event that celebrates the preservation of Gullah culture through history, folk art, music, food, and craft, honoring a West and Central tradition. Visitors from all over the world come and take part in these celebrations and preservation of art, history, and culture. Penn Center is always the second weekend in November. We have not had it for the last 2 years, but hopefully in 2022, we'll be back. It's another thing we do to preserve the history, the connection with the Gullah and Penn Center. It's the Penn Center 1802 Circular. This was established in 2003 to recognize leaders who embodied the spirit of Penn Center and who served as a national advocate for the enduring history and culture of the Sea Island. Your very own Pat Conroy was inducted into the circle in 2011. Pat Conroy loved this island. He spent a lot of his time at Penn Center. So we honored him as a member of the Penn Center 1862 Circle. Penn Center educating today. Today we're still educating. We have a full daycare center that's closed now because of COVID. We have an after-school program. We have a summer day camp with a feeding program component. We sponsor special holiday events for the community. The last one we had at Christmas time, we had a wonderful Santa Claus came to town. We aid in the health of the community with blood drives, COVID testing, and voter registration. With COVID being so prevalent in the community, we try to do things to help the community because most of the people cannot go on the computer and sign up. So we try to sponsor things here that can come here and get it done. And there's a documentary on BET by Soledad O'Brien interviewing Gullah farmers and heirs property retention. Tune in next week for that. On our campus now, we have 2 National Reconstruction Monuments established as a unit of the National Park Service by proclamation of President Barack Obama in January 2017. This National Reconstruction Monument attracts more visitors to our museum and community, thus increasing more jobs and economic growth. Also, having the National Monument on campus helps in preserving our land. While we have a National Monument, developers cannot come in and take our land, put it that way. Our conditions continue 159 years later. During 1862, men were still plowing. Today, we're still plowing. 1862, they were making basket. We're still making basket. 1862, they were building houses. We're still doing it. They were fishing and making nets. We're still doing it. So the tradition continue with the Gullah people passing on the skills and craft to the young people living on this island. It's a living history and culture. Penn Center history in the Gullah community. Penn Center and the Gullah community will exist. It may look different, but be presented in a different way. But the history, art, culture will be ongoing through the craft, songs, and people. Many stars are born on this live on this island who attend the Penn School and Penn School Learning Program. As you can see, one person you see is our American Idol winner, Candace Glover. She attended the Penn School After School Program. You see Ron Days. He's a very influential member of our community. And work of art, Mr. Sam Doyle himself. Mr. Sam Doyle told the history of the Gullah people through his paintings. We do the same, we have parades. You may not know it, but Penn School had a band and they had parades. They celebrate the way we celebrate now. They had band tunes, we still have the boat. And we have, there's a Maquetta Goodwine there, the chieftain Queen Quet, she's part of our community. So we have very prominent people that came from our community, which we're so proud of right now. And suggesting reading if you want to know more about Penn Center and our history. These are some books you can read. Leave it there for a second. You'll have it on tape then. Moving on. And like a majestic oak tree, Penn Center and the Gullah community will stand the test of time. Thank you so much. I truly enjoyed bringing this information to you. And I hope you come and visit us sometimes. Have a good evening.
Marie, that was wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. As a newcomer to Penn Center, one of the things that I have been really surprised to see is that many people, even in the Beaufort area, know nothing about Penn Center. Many, individuals throughout South Carolina that, are very astute in African-American history know nothing about Penn Center. So what you have put together, I think is phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. I think that, in moving forward, there's tremendous opportunity, and I thank the Conroy Center for allowing both of us to come in. But there's an opportunity to spread the wealth, to spread the news of Penn Center. Fantastic job.
Thank you.
And I think there's some questions in the chat room. I'm going to mute.
I'm not seeing it.
Okay, so basically we have, I guess it's George Radosky. He's talking about The Water is Wide, one of Pat Conroy's early literary works. And he said, were those of the Gullah community. You remember it was at Defusky Island, actually, where he taught. So he's asking, I think, if they are members of the Gullah community.
No, they are from the Yamacraw village on Defusky. They were not part of this St. Helena Island community, the ones in the book.
Right, would they be considered Gullah?
They are, yeah, they are Gullah, yes.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, well, to come forward and kind of build on what you have presented. I am going to be looking at, and let me share my screen here. And let me go ahead to slideshow from the beginning. Okay, I'm actually going to be talking about, I'm actually building a bridge off of what Marie has presented. When we think of the Gullah community and the wonderful history that Marie presented, it does surface the importance of the land to the Gullah community. And I'm going to bridge that a little bit further and into using the word landscape. We saw in Marie's presentation, how the land brought forth food in so many different ways, from the sea, from the ocean, from the land itself. And one of the things that Pat Conroy, definitely emphasized when he talked about his journey as actually an individual and his journey as a writer, he really went back to the landscape of the Low Country and how important it was. So I'm looking at this concept of landscape in the Low Country as a means that really began to enter and shape Pat Conroy's identity, his sense of self, and also his pathway to being the phenomenal literary writer that he is. So I'm going to begin by taking a quote from A Low Country Heart, where Conroy says, "When I came here, I stumbled upon a land so beautiful, I had to hunt for words that ached with joyous and carnal charms of the green marshes, which seemed to be the source of all life." And I'm not going to stay too long on this quote, but I do want to bring out some key words in it. First of all, the very beginning, we see the reference to land. And he talks about stumbling upon this land. And he says this whole landscape was so beautiful that, again, in his imagination, in his mind, as a writer, he began to hunt for words. And he said that ached with joyous and carnal charms. And he brings in the green marshes. And he ends by saying, this is the source of all life. This leads us to understanding how important this landscape was. This landscape of the Low Country was to Pat Conroy. Another brief quote from the prologue from the Prince of Tides. He says, my wound is my geography. It is also my anchorage and my port of call. We'll go back to those words as we move forward, because he talks about this landscape being his anchor, his port of call. So I want to talk very briefly, and I'm going to bring all three of these up at one time. You know, where do we fit in as individuals, as human beings, to become aware of our landscape and how it begins to shape who we are? So a person does not exist in isolation, but through relationships with his or her own context. We saw this in Marie's presentation, you know, how the Africans that came here that were enslaved in the St. Helena area or in the development of Penn Center, how this all came through various relationships. This was the same thing with Pat Conroy. When he came here, he not only just observed the landscape, but a relationship began to develop. So these relationships support a state of awareness and a necessary state of being when one draws in his or her own landscape. The relationship between who we are is inextricably linked with where we are. So again, from a Low Country heart, here's another quote. He says, when I began to write my books, I carried the comeliness of the Low Country deep inside me. Its beauty was shining, a living thing that would never leave me as long as I was true to that starry, river-fed country of my art that was Beaufort's gift to me. I can't write a sentence without breaking out in song, praising the everlasting summons of these sea islands we call home. Now, I could pick apart this and do a very close reading, but time is somewhat limited and there's more that I want to bring forward. But I mean, for me, in going back and doing this research and entering these works of Conroy's that I read, you know, many years ago, it's just been such a beautiful experience for me now coming to Penn Center and entering this Low Country landscape to really enter what impact, the powerful impact that this landscape had on Conroy as a writer, and then he brings it to life in such beautiful ways. So, oops, I went back. Let me go forward. Okay. I'm really going to focus on two literary works of Conroy's, more so The Water is Wide, and also then a bit on The Prince of Tides. So in The Water is Wide, Conroy employs a mode of landscape categorization that metaphorically follows four directions: forward, backward, downward, and upward. So what does that mean? There is a forward mode of the use of landscape that serves as a placeholder and a lens as Conroy delves into shaping and growing Conrac's identity throughout the novel. All right. There is a backward direction in the use of landscape that plays a key role in introducing the reader to events that are remembered. Now, of course, we know that this is a memoir, all right, with characters that have taken on various different names. But this is a combination of a use of landscape to bring the reader forward in the narrative of the novel, but it also has a backward motion, because there are moments that are remembered both by Conroy and Conrac in the novel. There is a downward direction that serves as a vehicle to introducing the reader to the harshness of life and the immediacy of death. And I'm going to talk about that in a few minutes, how that plays out in the novel. And finally, an upward direction toward a sense of transcendence or spirituality. So, how do we begin this? So, this is a quote that will exemplify this forward motion in developing the identity of Conrad in the novel through the use of landscape. So as Conrad is making his way to Yamacraw, all right, Conroy brings in, all right, this description of landscape that is so powerful and so beautiful, and as a definite point of contact in developing the character of Conrad. The island is fringed with the green, undulating marshes of the southern coast. Shrimp boats ply the waters around her, and fishermen cast their lines along her bountiful shores. Deer cut through her forest in small, silent herds. The great southern oaks stand broodingly on her banks. The island and the waters around her teem with life. There is something eternal and indestructible about the tide-eroded shores and the dark, threatening silences of the swamps in the heart of the island. Yamacraw is beautiful because man has not yet had time to destroy this beauty. We see this forward motion coming here as he introduces the reader to Conrad. And again, this forward motion surfaces as he states, I drove the boat into the water and pointed out the high spots of the trip. The osprey's nest atop the utility pole on Savage Island, the huge crescent sandbar that blocked one whole section of the Navigable Creek at low tide on Bull Island, the thousands of brown oysters encrusted in the mud flats along the shore. A porpoise broke like a green shaft in the water beside us, the sun flashing off his body in brilliant knives of light. A great blue heron, disturbance. The boat was an intrusion. It always was. Here again, we still see through this use of the landscape, a forward motion, all right? It's a forward motion that is developing the character of Conrad, but also a forward motion that is bringing forth the narrative of the novel itself. And I'm going to bring up all of this at one time so that I can just keep moving through it. All right, so Conrad, further on in the novel, all right, we're told that he's, he has to take this boat, to Yamacraw to teach. And there are many hurdles that he has to face along the way, whether the boat working, and all of a sudden, in the midst of this novel and the narrative, all right, Conrad is bogged down in a sandbar, all right, stopping his forward motion as he makes his way to the school itself. So in retelling this, he actually kind of moves into a backward moment in remembering the ride and what had happened. So Conrad, in looking backwards at the time the boat ride to the island resulted in the boat landing in the middle of a sandbar, brings forth a description of landscape that foreshadows the downward spiral of his eventual dismissal. And we can see the shift from the use of language here, from something that is brilliant and joyous and full of life to a totally different direction. He says, soon the sandbar exposed its presence completely, and Zeke and I both suspected I had driven to the very middle of it before I cut the motor. The salt marsh was still winter brown, although if you looked carefully, you could spot a promise of green flavoring the dead crisp grasses along the shore. The spring tides had not come in full force, the great flood tides that would inundate the marshes completely, washing away tons of Spartina grasses that had finished the life cycle, bringing the dead grasses in clumps from the inner marsh and carrying them out to sea. So I had time to study the swamp in transition. This was also a moment of transition in the novel, because it is leading to the reader, as I said earlier, where Conrad, despite, and it's Conroy, we all know it's Conroy, despite just a very powerful fight to hold on to his position as a teacher and the good that he was doing, eventually there's a spiraling down, okay, to where he ends up being dismissed. And then he goes on further with this downward use of language and remembering back. He said, I even wavered on the edge of deeper thoughts, of time and timelessness, of now and eternity, of my impermanence as compared to the marshes, the rivers, the tides. In 50 years, I will be 74, an old curmudgeon with a hairless, toothless head, the geriatric remnant of the 40s, whose blood had dried, whose youth had withered, whose dreams had died like the grasses and washed out on a spring tide. When I came across this in the text, I was so moved by it. It does serve as a point of foreshadowing of what eventually is going to happen in the novel. But, hearing Conroy's words expressed in this way, it brought me back to Conroy as the person. And probably we can never predict when death is going to come knocking on our door, when our life is going to end. But there was also something of a foreshadowing, of what eventually would come to be not only part of Conroy's life, but all of our lives. So Conrad, defrocked and slightly dishonored, retired to his room to write about this year on Yarmulke. And of course, we know that's Conroy. And we begin to see this upward motion coming in. It was a strange year, a kind of seasoning among the marshes, the migrating fowl and the people of the island. But just as time heals the marsh grasses that wither and perish in the winter cold, so does it quell the storms that often threaten the human soul. Again, this upward movement. I felt much beauty in my year with them. For them, I leave a single prayer, that the river is good to them in the crossing. I promise not to cry at this, okay? But I just was so moved and going back through how literary devices were used, how language was used in this novel. And again, stepping back in awe of Conroy's literary abilities, his ability as a writer. And this interaction with landscape, I think, added such a dimension to what we oftentimes maybe didn't stop and pause and think about as we go through the various narratives in his novels. I'm going to speak just a little bit about the landscape and the sense of self in The Prince of Tides. And I'm going to talk about, and let me see if I can, why this got so large, I don't know. All right, there's a difference between an internal versus an external understanding, indicating the way objects are used in a casual way and indicating how we as individuals begin to associate with the world that we live in, okay? And I'm gonna move this, hold on one second, let me move this over here. All right, this internal understanding leads to an imaginative perception where one forms a conception of the world based on how objects, artifacts, and space relate to our experiences. Conroy draws upon the low country landscape that serves as an information gathering vehicle that stems from a deep understanding of the power when the writer blends both the external and internal use of landscape as a means for exploring and developing the character's sense of self. Now I'm going to move this back over on the other side. Okay, here we go. All right. So this is a quote from The Prince of Tides, towards the beginning of the novel. And, he's the Tom Wingo is looking back and is talking about the time when he and his twin sister were born, So he says, in the forest outside the house, the wind began to bear down hard on the trees, and rains gouged the earth with powerful newborn hands. Waves began to crash over the dock. Snakes began to leave their burrows and take to high branches of trees, sensing flood. A small uprooted palmetto tumbled down the road, leading up to the house like a man rolling. No birds sang on the island. Even the insects had battered down. Now, this is a very unusual way. Well, maybe it's not, those of us that have gone through the birthing process. But, you know, in the novel itself, I kind of paused at this because I'm thinking this is also a means of foreshadowing, you know, the telling of the story of Tom Wingo's upbringing, his interaction with his brother, his sister, his interaction with his father primarily, and his mother. And this is not a joyous, glorious use of landscape. It's hidden in a very brooding, darkening way. So in looking at this, I see this as a means of foreshadowing of what is going to come. And again, in this very powerful novel. He said, so in referencing the recurring visits, this is further on, towards the middle of the novel, all right? And the reader has already been exposed to the horrible abuse that the Wingo family has had to bear up under with the father's interaction with the mother, with the children, with his drinking, you know, just horrible beatings, emotional abuse that is taking place. But yet Conroy purposely brings in landscape here to bring about, after all of that we've learned as the reader, into this family's dysfunctional, horrible way of interacting with one another. He brings in this moment of reflecting and representing his father in a very different way. You know, the children are out on the boat, you know, with their father, and he's referencing the recurring visit of the dolphin Snow. Conroy explores the color of the mammal as a key component of connecting landscape with his sense of self, all right? He says, rising, she hung suspended, concolorous with peaches and high-risen moons, then down as milk again. These are the quicksilver moments of my childhood. Now, this is Wingo, but we also know this is Conroy, all right? Irresistible, emblematic. I can recall them only in fragments and shivers of the heart. When the white porpoise comes there, this is transfiguration too? In dreams, the porpoise remains in memory's waters, a pale divinity who nourishes the fire and deepest cold of all the black waters of my history. Again, these are words that Tom Wingo is introducing into the novel, but we also know that this is Conroy's, you know, thinking back on his relationship with his father, with his family. And there are these moments that surface in a very brilliant way. And then there are those dark moments that go deep down into the deepest cold of all the black waters of his history. The blending of landscape through an external landscape and an internal landscape of one's sense of self occurs toward the end of The Prince of Tides, when Tom Wingo narrates his father's journey as a young boy and discovers what is perceived as an uncharted island. It's a very beautiful way of bringing his father back into the narrative. He says one of his friends, all right, was paddling, and this is his father, all right, one of his father's friends was paddling his bateau, which Marie brought up, you know, the significance of this boat in the history of the Gullah community that is still used today. And again, it's a very important part of the landscape of the low country. He says, one of his friends was paddling his bateau through the marsh, grass at high tide, flushing the birds from their hiding places in the lush Spartina. Essentially what is happening here in the novel is his father is going out in the boat into the marshes to hunt for marsh hens, okay? It was a 1/4 acre of uncharted land that he stumbles upon, a cluster of palmettos, one spindly oak. Each spring, the elder Wingo would make the trip to what he had named Marsh Hen Island. When the cobia and shad entered the land, fishing and crabbing and camping out beneath the stars. So this is a very gentle way of bringing us forward into an understanding of Tom Wingo's father, all right, and a use of landscape that isn't threatening, that isn't deep, that isn't dark. And then he says, whenever I thought of my father's retreat from the world, I envisioned great feats of seafood and my father's laughter when he navigated his boat through the acres of dense marsh and the tides lifted us up to that inconsequential piece of land that cut us off from the rest of the planet. And it was through these experiences with his father that horrible interaction that was happening far too regularly, okay, within the family, that we see Conroy's father being perceived in a very positive, loving, laughing environment. So throughout all of Conroy's work, there is a distinct effort to achieve an authentic sense of landscape. He utilizes an act of awareness in creating both a real and an imagined perception of space in a way that is reflective of his identity as a person, writer, and human being. This creation of landscape or perception of space is a verbal drawing of landscape that is unique, that is a unique reconstruction of his own sense of self. His creation of landscape is a mode of representation that employs perception, interpretation, and reflection. Oftentimes, I think we can tie Conroy's work into, well, this was his experience in growing up, all right? But experience, the relevant definitions from the Merriam-Webster Dictionary are something personally encountered, undergone, or lived through, an active process of directly perceiving events or reality. The fact or state of having been affected by or gained knowledge through direct observation and participation. I'm going to go back to the very end here, all right? Conroy used landscape in such powerful ways as a form of a very strong literary device in developing his characters, advancing the narrative, bringing forward key moments in his work, that actually came from a state of having been affected by or gained knowledge through the direct observation or participation in this low country landscape. And go through all of these works and find this particular way of utilizing landscape is one of the many powerful ways that Conroy uses this literary device. I mentioned to Jonathan before we went live that if I were younger and I were still working on my PhD, or if I wanted to write a book, all right, I would take this use of landscape and go into every one of the narratives and the pieces that Conroy has written and developed. And I think you would come out with a wealth of knowledge and information about the powerful way that Conroy uses this particular device. So that's it for me.
Good job.
All right. So we've got, Cassandra joined us. Thank you. We're honored. All right. Does anyone know exactly when the Soledad O'Brien documentary actually aired this week, but you had to Yeah, you had to have access through BET TV. Now, I've already contacted our representative, all right, and she is going to alert me when it will actually be available as a video that we can view. So I will make sure that it's up on our website because I couldn't even get into it, the link that they sent. It was live and you had to have been able to have tuned in at that time. All right. Oh, wonderful to hear. I think it was a great presentation on both our parts, and I so thoroughly have enjoyed this. And as I said, I can see why, more so, you know, why the Gullah community is so connected to the land that's here, you know, based on Marie's presentation. And I can also see why Pat Conroy just embraced this landscape. And it became such a part of who he was, and entered into his literary career in such wonderful ways. Yeah, I see another comment here about the Soledad documentary. It was so frustrating because the information that I got said you just click on this link and you're going to be able to view it. And no one was able to bring it up. So we ended up, I actually emailed the representative I had yesterday and said, what's going on? And she said, oh, you had to enter it live. And she said, but I will send you the link when the video is available. So I'm not going to let her get off the hook here. We will get it, and I'll make sure that it's up on our website. And those that were able to view it live, it has filtered back that it was a tremendous documentary, and you know, how much they really appreciated it and had enjoyed viewing it. So let's see. We have from Pamela Lawton. She says, thank you for checking on Soledad's documentary. She said she wasn't able to access it either. She said, you both were marvelous. The Gullah Low Country is just amazing and rich in history that everyone needs to hear. Far more for our future generations. Thank you both for everything. And thank you for those that had joined the panel discussion. I know that Marie and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And, you know, I just, you know, am so anxious to learn more, you know, about the Gullah community. Penn Center, I mean, Marie is just such a jewel to have here. And I'm going to go back and start reading more of Conroy's work and revisiting them. You know,
I'm going to start reading the book myself. Your words were so thrilling. It went, I could really feel it. I'm going to get me a copy and read it back and forth, backward and forward.
Well, that to me is the strength of Conroy's work. I know some people say, oh, I got too bogged down in description or whatever here and there. But if you really take your time, you know, and you read through and you enter the narrative, you will see he is a master of the use of language, and especially for me in doing this research, you know, a master of the use of landscape in his work. We're getting some good comments, so really we appreciate everyone joining in. And you know, as soon as we get, you know, the videos, you know, even of the other panel discussions, we'll make sure they're up on our website. So I guess we can end it. Is that?
All right, Miss Charlene.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you. Everyone have a good rest of the week and come visit us at Penn Center. Marie
Museum.
Marie is our phenomenal docent that you will just hear even more and more firsthand knowledge, you know, of the history of the Gullah community. Anyone that has taken her tour, we are on a modified opening. We are open Monday through Friday. Tours can be arranged through contacting Marie. The information is on our website. She does a phenomenal tour of the museum. more, I mean, some of them run an hour, a good hour, hour and a half, based on questions that come from the group when they're meeting with her face to face. We've started having a few school groups come in. We've got it worked out how we're going to keep, social distancing in place. We are observing, all of the precautions to keep this a very healthy environment. But, it still is lots happening here at Penn Center, which we're really proud of. Our executive director, Mr. Marion Burns, is doing a phenomenal job. You're going to see the reconstruction of some of these buildings taking place very soon. We're just very excited about the energy that's coming out of Penn Center. So come visit, and you leave with pearls of knowledge, more so than when you first entered.
Yes. Thank you so much for having us. And have a good evening. Okay.
All right. So I am going to,
I'm leaving. All right.